Thank you for joining us today for this important discussion on the challenges of food security in the tropics leading up to 2050, with a particular focus around Singapore and the role of urban and sustainable food production in its ability to be able to secure food security for Singapore. To introduce myself, I will be chairing tonight's forum. So I'm Professor Dean Jerry. I'm the Director of the Tropical Futures Institute here at James Cook University in Singapore. Since its declaration in 2016 by the United Nations General Assembly, the International Day of the Tropics is observed annually and acknowledges the extraordinary variety of the tropics. Tropical nations right around the globe have made significant progress over the last decade, but they still face a variety of distinct challenges to achieve their sustainable development. James Cook University, as one of the leads in the State of the Tropics report, always take the opportunity to celebrate the International Day of the Tropics. And in 2023, we're going to celebrate this day with a focus on the needs of sustainable food production in an ever-changing environment. As you all know, food security is the ability of a population to access sufficient, safe and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and preferences. Food security, however, is a very complex and multidimensional issue that involves environmental, social and political factors. It also is very dynamic and constantly changes in our changing world. The tropics are home to more than half of the world's population, and they produce about 80% of the world's food. However, they also face some of the most severe threats to food security, such as climate change, population growth, urbanisation, land degradation, water scarcity, pests and diseases, as we've seen more recently, trade disruptions and conflicts. These threats are expected to intensify in the coming decades. Sorry for the bad news. It's going to pose significant risks to the livelihood and well-being of millions of people within the tropics. To bring it a little bit more local, Singapore is a small island city-state in the tropics that relies very heavily on food imports to meet its domestic need. Singapore has one of the highest per capita incomes in the world, but also one of the lowest levels of self-sufficient food security. Singapore imports more than 90% of its food from over 170 countries, really making it vulnerable to these external shocks and uncertainties. Singapore itself, as a small island, also faces challenges such as limited water and land resources, high energy costs, changing consumer preferences and rising food safety standards. To address these issues and ensure its long-term food security, Singapore has adopted a strategy of diversifying its food sources, increasing its local production and enhancing its resilience. One of the key pillars of this strategy, which you'll hear about this evening, is to develop and adopt innovative solutions that can increase the productivity, sustainability and quality of food production for Singapore and reaching out into the region. Some of these solutions include, which you'll hear about tonight, aquaculture, new food technologies, alternative proteins, new policies and new food safety demands. So ladies and gentlemen, these are some of the key topics that we will hear about tonight in this forum. I hope that this session will provide you with valuable insights into the challenges and opportunities of food security in the tropics leading up to 2050. and the importance of some of these strategies that have been put in place to secure food security for Singapore and out into the region. I also hope that the session will stimulate fruitful discussions and collaborations amongst the participants and the audience, both here in person and online, as we work together to achieve our common goal of ensuring food security for all in the tropics. So before we start, just some housekeeping rules and information. I just want to advise everybody that photos and video will be taken for publicity purposes. We also will have, it is a forum with a question and answer component. So all attendees, both here and online, will be able to ask questions at any point in the lecture using this portal here, Slido, which I'll leave up for a moment. So please take a moment, either here or online, to scan the QR code, go to the website, and as the presenters are given their talks, any questions you have or issues you want clarification, please type into Slido. And at the end of the session, when we have the question and answer forum, we will try to get to as many of them as we can. With no further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, Professor Sebastian Mora-Strahl. Sebastian is the Executive Director of the Bioinformatics Institute at A-Star here in Singapore. And we've asked Sebastian to give a bit of an overview around the Singapore food story and the role A-Star is playing in this initiative. So please join me in welcoming Professor Mora-Strahl.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, thanks first of all for the invitation. Hi everyone here and hi everyone online. And I don't take too much of your time, but I'm also very open and happy to answer any questions now and later as well. So I was tasked with giving you also a little bit of introduction of one of the amazing things that Singapore has been doing. You know, when I came here 15 years ago, a lot of the things that you see nowadays, Marina Bay Sands, the Gardens by the Bay, they didn't exist yet. But I did see greenhouses where they're starting to grow plants already. And when I see those things coming into reality, you realize that Singapore is a place where a lot of things actually do come true. So if I hear anywhere in the world someone has a goal 30 by 30, I think it's a way of distributing funds, but I think Singapore has a way of actually delivering on it. And this is Singapore as a whole, and partners like JCU are very important too. So the aim, just in short, 30 by 30, is to go away from the previous 90% dependency of imports for food and rather develop 30% of own nutrition production by 2030. So this comes to the 30 by 30. And A-Star, the agency that I am also part of, supports the ecosystem. There are many aspects to the economic growth, to create an ecosystem, to be vibrant, to be like in the Bay Area or like in Boston, but for food. And food security, resilience and sustainability is the driving force. So I want to highlight a few of the elements that A-Star has been contributing. We have a flagship institute leading our efforts. Is the CIFBI, so Institute for Food and Biotechnology Innovations. And there are many elements going towards agri-tech and aquaculture, but also novel proteins. Being able to develop new technologies that relate to food also require a good safety program. And Ben will talk much more about that. And I'm also here because my little contribution to this comes in a true Singapore style. Several years ago, we started developing, together with Procter & Gamble, a way to judge if a protein is similar to known allergens. And this is important. When you develop a new shampoo and you want to put new plant materials in it, you want to make sure that whatever you make new will not create allergies for the people. And very similar, and developing this further, it turns out we can use the same methodology also for food. And together with Andreas and Timo here, we have a project where we're looking at fish allergens, where we're looking at computational ways of being able to distinguish which allergen is more likely to cause a reaction in people, combining computational work, combining clinical testing with sera of patients. And it's just one of the simple examples how we are trying to contribute for this whole ecosystem to start up. So once you have a way of testing safety for novel proteins, you can be more creative in trying to create more novel proteins. And of course also look at more species, look at which species of fish in aquaculture are of course better suited. This could be shrimps, this could be fish. So thank you, I will stop here. And I'm very grateful for the invitation, and I hope I can answer more questions to you too. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Professor Sebastian. Our next speaker is our very own from the Tropical Futures Institute here at James Cook University, Associate Professor Jose Domingos. And Associate Professor Domingos is going to give a presentation about a very important part of the strategy here in Singapore related to food security, but also throughout the entire region and the entire globe. Aquaculture is the fastest growing primary food production sector. And so I'll pass you now over to Associate Professor Jose Domingos to tell you about the wonderful things aquaculture can do around food security.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So we talk about food, and you have food at the end. So, you know, we promise what we deliver. So I'll talk about the aquatic food security in particular. And you should start this presentation with when we talk about food security, where we have this population growth explosion. We already passed the 8 billion, and by 2050 we'll be 9 billion. And we all like to eat, right? And here in Singapore I learned this term about what's to be a foodie. People travel for food, and people here love food. So in order for us to continue to eat, we need to produce more, and quite a bit more. And on the good note, this population expansion has also been followed by the increase in the middle class, and people have a greater purchasing power now that they had before, and they want to eat better. We want to eat better, right? And this eating better, for many people, comes into the form of having like more protein in the diet, you know, like meats and also seafood, which is seen as a very high quality form of protein, being like the most highly traded, you know, food commodity. In order to feed these 9 billion people, we will need to increase the production by 240 million, you know, in this time frame. Whoops, what have I done? This one. Okay. So when the World Bank is looking attentively into it and has, in response to the rise in food insecurity, has issued a recent report saying that one of the main issues concerning food insecurity now reflects on issues like inflation, war, issues related with the supply chain, fertilizer availability, and refugee crisis. And as we're talking about the tropics, this stands to our this is this dashboard, which is a current update dashboard. We can find what's the issues of food security in different countries, and what we see from this is the main issues are in the tropics, of course, particularly in Africa. But Southeast Asia is blessed in terms of food, but not too far from here to countries like Timor-Leste, and there's this refugee crisis in Bangladesh with the 1 million refugees from the Rohingya, a group that had to flee Myanmar 5 years ago. And by kind of chance, I happened to go there, because when we think about food security, we say, what are you guys talking about? There's so many hawker centers, there's so much food available. Where is the insecurity? But not going too far from here. There's people living in different realities. So when I went there, I found so many homeless children in the streets, and they were begging for food. And I said, this is a totally different reality I'm not used to. So I've been quite active helping some groups there to feed the kids. And to bring back to the talk, what I'll talk about is that one of the staples of the protein is fish. And so fish is very important, play a very important role in assuring this food security. What we see in all of these bars, the blue bars, are the increased fish consumption. It's going quite exponential, even though the population growth from 1950 is kind of linear. But this exponential growth is because in 1950 we used to eat about 7 kilos of fish per year, where now we tripled that. So we want to eat more fish, and population is growing. So how do we get so much fish? Well, the fishing vessels are going deeper in the ocean, because at surface and mid-waters, fish is gone. And we now, even going down the food chain, we are catching the little fish that the big fish that used to eat. So with all of that, you can see that there's this depletion in fisheries stocks and an increase in the overfished stocks and a decrease in the underfished stocks. So this leads to this figure that many of you know, that about 30 years ago, we reached the maximum capacity that the ocean can supply in terms of seafood. That was about 90 million tons in 93. And ever since, even with more technology, use of sonar, satellite imagery, more powerful boats going deeper, we're getting about the same amount of fish. But how is this demand being met? So it's being met by aquaculture. And now aquaculture produces about half of all the seafood consumed in the world. So it is, like Dean mentioned, the fastest growing food production business in the world. And but I've been talking a lot about marine, but the majority of production currently is coming from fresh water, like ponds, like species like the carps, tilapia, and catfishes. But the marine sector is also increasing quite a bit. And just to put into the regional context, Southeast Asia and Asia produces 90% of the aquaculture production in the world. The rest of the world is just 10%, with China being about 60%. And if you look at this figure on the right, it's the consumption per capita. See, seafood is very important here in Southeast Asia, and it's over 30 kilos per capita per year that's consumed. So then, just to put into a local perspective, well, regionally, so we could say we are the epicenter of global aquaculture production. Even though, like with other food items that we import, fish production is only 10%. And for just to illustrate, for some who don't you know, where is this fish being farmed? Well, it's farmed mainly along the Johor Strait, with farms in the west that farm more robust species because the water quality is not very good there, because there's less flow. And we have like milkfish, mullets, marine tilapia. And in the east, we've got more highly prized species like the barramundi, the red snapper, the groupers, threadfin, pompanus, and some farms in the south. So what type of aquaculture is being done here? Well, primarily this coastal aquaculture, with the majority being the net cage farming. And new ideas are springing to improve this and to produce more with less space, which is not called the closed containment systems. It's pretty much instead of putting nets in the sea, we put tanks on barges, and some of these are purposely designed for aquaculture with the tanks below sea level, with water being filtered before it comes to the fish and also filtered out before effluent is discharged. And this greatly helps avoid situations like red tides. So we're seeing this development of these new farms, and it's unique in the world. It's been done here in Singapore. But also we've got some farms inland, like just the traditional pond-based systems, and attempt of vertical systems using multi-story in buildings and things like that. And some in the southern islands doing this more common type of cages like we've seen salmon in Europe, that is the circular type of ponds. Okay, so two more slides, so bear here with me. We've got to ensure security, we have to produce enough in a safe manner. I won't go into it because it will be covered by Ben soon. We need to make it sustainable. This means without pollution. We need to be shock-proof and be able to produce regardless of what's happening outside, which is very different. And one thing that sometimes we don't stress enough is that we must produce it ethically, and we are farming animals which we're going to eat. So I think we need to put a lot more emphasis in animal welfare. And just to wrap up, so to achieve this aquaculture, to achieve the destiny as a supplier in food, we need to produce more efficiently. And in saying that, the main issue is disease. About 40% of the production is lost due to diseases. So we need to be better at detecting and managing the health of the animals, develop better feeds, use systems multi-trophic, which means the waste of one system can be the input for the other, such as use of fish farming and algae or macroalgae attached to it. We need to develop the people to produce all of this feed, this food, the fish, and we're trying to do our part here with the graduate programs, with a minimum environmental footprint and use of technology and biotechnology, as we'll see more of it. So this concludes my talk. Thank you very much, and I'm keen to questions at the end.
Thank you, Associate Professor Jose Domingos. Now it's my pleasure to welcome to the podium Dr. Ben Smith. Ben is the director of the Future Ready Food Safety Hub, or FRESH, here in Singapore. And we are also proud to say he's adjunct associate professor at James Cook University, Singapore. And you can produce all the food in the world, but unless it's safe, it's no use to anyone. And so Ben's area of expertise is around food safety. And Ben, I'll hand over to you to tell you for you to tell everyone about food safety.
Great. Okay, well, I'll try and tell you as much as I can in the time that I've got, and I'm really pleased to be here at JCU here in Singapore, particularly as a proud Australian. It's great to be at an Australian university here in Singapore. So what I'd like to talk a little, if I go the right way, talk a little bit about today, as already mentioned, is the importance of having a safe and secure food system. And as the saying goes, we cannot have a secure or nutritious food system without ensuring safety, because if it's not safe, we're not going to eat it. So a lot of effort is being put in, as Sebastian mentioned, into developing new approaches, and we heard from Jose as well about new ways to bring protein levels up and food into Singapore, but to do that we also have to ensure it's safe. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is the future of food safety, but also linked to that, the safety of future foods, with a focus here in Singapore. So when we're thinking about food safety, we think a lot about the classical aspects of food safety with regard to things like food adulteration, microbial contamination, chemical contamination, all of these things that have kept me busy for many years as a food safety scientist. And these things don't go away as we move into these new areas. They're always going to be there, and here in the tropics, we have certain levels of risk for some of these areas more than others. Microbiology is a big one. Here in the tropics, it's hot, it's wet, we don't like it as people, the microbes love it. But as we start moving into the future of foods, we also have to start understanding the pressures around the global food system and the new ways that we're starting to address those, and whether or not they too can also introduce new types of food safety risks. So when we think about food safety, there's so many different things that we've heard a few about today already that can actually influence whether our food is safe. Climate, changing perceptions, different types of food technologies. There's so much for food safety scientists to do, so much for food safety scientists to get worried about. That's why I'm going grey and losing my hair. But here in Singapore and in the tropics, there are certain areas that we're actually focusing a lot on and we have to be mindful of. And one of the big things very much is being in a tropical environment, and here we are on World Tropics Day, and this aspect of climate change. And I think that countries like Singapore and areas in the tropics actually can be good test beds to start understanding what might happen when we see different changes in our environment. But what I'm actually going to focus more so on today is really focusing in on this concept of novel foods or future foods as a source for meeting food security, and how do we address it, particularly from some of the pressures that are involved with bringing these things to market. So a big one being the regulatory pressures that are in place. So when we think about novel foods, there's many things that are starting to hit our plate, many different alternatives. We heard about some of the aquacultural approaches and urban farming, which are bringing traditional foods to market, but with different processes. So that too can actually lead to different sorts of issues. You've got controlled farming where you've got higher density. We heard about, I was amazed, 40% of loss by disease. Now that's fish disease. Imagine if we got some disease or parasite in there that could be a zoonotic disease and transfer to humans as well. But when we come to the novel foods, we're starting to look into some really interesting areas of things like waste valorization. That introduces different questions from a safety perspective, particularly in the tropics. A lot of my colleagues are doing fermentation of waste products, and they go out and they get the leftover spent meal from a process or caffeine from a process, and they bring it back to the lab and they say, oh, it smells. Yeah, it smells because it's been sitting in water and waste, and bacteria is growing. We're in the tropics. You leave anything out for a few minutes, things start to grow. Some of my colleagues are starting to look into plant-based. We have different plant sources here, different types of growing environments that can lead to different levels of potentially allergens that we may not be seeing in other areas. Cultivated meat is a big one. I'm not going to talk too much about it today, but Singapore have put a lot of effort into cultivated meats, and it's introducing new technology. New types of, not necessarily proteins, but new ways of bringing those proteins to market where we're actually using different types of ways to develop. And then, of course, there's insects, which I think is a really interesting one for the tropics, because here we're bombarded with a lot of insects. We're exposed because of the environment that we live in. For the entomologists, it's great. I used to do entomology in Australia, and it was great to be able to collect insects in a country like Australia. It's even better here in a country like Singapore. But that poses an issue when we start thinking about the potential allergy aspects of bringing insects into our diet. So when we start thinking about novel foods, and bringing them to the market, we have to start thinking about the drivers and the trends that are bringing them in. And so these drivers and trends are both on a social perspective of acceptance, but also very much on a safety perspective. But the two go together. So safety is very much a driver, and it is one of the drivers that actually a lot of people are concerned about when they're looking at some of these novel foods. So we have to be able to educate and understand a little bit more about what is happening with these novel foods, not just to assess their safety, but also to ensure their acceptance. And it's interesting here in Singapore, so this is actually data from the UK, where you can actually see that insects are better accepted than some of the cultivated meats. Interestingly, in Singapore, it's the opposite. We're a technological country. We're quite happy to eat cultivated meats, but we've moved on from our neighbours. We don't want to be eating insects. It's the ick factor, which is really quite interesting for a country in the region we are, where there is a lot of insects eaten as food. So, as I said, insects is an interesting one, and Andreas will talk about this a little bit later, I think, when he comes to his talk, because it is an interesting food for the tropics. We can grow insects really well here. We can get good biomass with little water and little facilities. But by introducing these insects into our food chain, we're also introducing different risks, like parasites that may be zoonotic, may be able to be transferred to humans. And the big one that you'll hear a little bit more about, that Sebastian touched on and Andreas is going to touch on more, is the aspect of allergy, which is really interesting here in Singapore because of the issue of exposure to insects, and particularly things like dust mites, which is a high problem here in Singapore. So one of the other things that we've also been looking at, and is really important when we're starting to think about all of these new technologies, and one of the reasons why Singapore has actually been at the forefront of bringing novel foods in, is that in addition to looking at the safety, we also need the mechanisms to translate that safety into regulation, to translate the safety into legislation so that foods can actually hit our plate. There's no point in getting up new aquaculture systems, new novel food systems, if we can't bring them to the market. And one of the biggest challenges we have with food security is actually breaking down this gap between the technological change and advancements and the regulatory change. And so that's one area as well that we've been spending a lot of time on, and that's really why Fresh as an organisation has come up. So one of the key things that we're trying to do here in Singapore is focus how we can actually translate the science that many of you out in the audience and many of you online are bringing to our market, and actually working with you to say how can we start understanding what that is and bring it to market quickly without getting hit by a whole lot of legal questions and complications. So safety by design goes hand in hand with novel foods, and we want to make sure that all of these new approaches are actually being thought about as we start right at the beginning. So what is the future of food safety here in Singapore? Well, the future is fresh. I'm a little bit biased, of course, but this is why we're designing organisations like Fresh. So Sebastian spoke very quickly about the future food story, and it's designed into 3 parts where we have urban farming and aquaculture. We also have a lot of attention on novel proteins and alternate proteins, but underlying that, as Dean said, is that we have to have the safety, and that's where Fresh comes in. So Fresh is a tripartite organisation. We're actually formed through A-STAR, which Sebastian introduced, the Singapore Food Agency, which is the country's equivalent of the Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, so our regulatory agency, and we're home-based out at Nanyang Technological University, but we work with a lot of the other universities as well. And we're designed to look both at research, talent development, risk communication, so as I said, acceptance is key, and consultancy. And actually most of our work at the moment is really on working with companies bringing in new products, so consultancy is a big part. Where we focus is we try and look at where the gaps are, and we try and look at how we can actually collaborate with others. People like Sebastian developing new approaches for allergenicity, people like Andreas who are assessing allergens in products and things in the market. and looking at how we can actually help develop the data. So under Fresh, our main focus is on toxicology and risk assessment of these new processes coming in, and then looking at how we actually translate that into frameworks to bring new products to market. And so if we think about the ecosystem and where we're linked in, we're seeing a really rapid growth of companies coming to Singapore with ideas. We don't have a food manufacturing sector really here in Singapore yet, but now we're starting to say we need it. So we're seeing all of these companies come in, we're seeing all of these technologies and ideas and innovators starting to meet into the ecosystem. How can we pull them together? And that's one of the things that Fresh is trying to do. Okay, so I won't go over this. You'll have the slides probably shared amongst you, but this was just to show that there has been a lot of work as late trying to bring new novel foods onto the market. So you'll know here in Singapore that we've got or Good Meats chicken. Upside and Good Meats were just assessed and approved in the US. Here in Singapore, we'll hopefully see some of these other foods coming through from people like Aleph Farms and others in the next few months, possibly early next year, touch wood, with some of these new technologies coming on market. So how are we doing that at Fresh? We're looking at the ways, as I said, to assess different types of products, and a big one is looking at new ways to do toxicology. And so one of our key areas and interests, and we're open to collaboration in this field, is on actually how do we assess these new ingredients or new proteins. So we're doing a lot of work, it was mentioned by Jose about animal welfare. We're actually doing a lot of work with regard to non-animal testing because there's a huge interest in animal welfare subjects also on the testing side of things. It's not just on the farming, it's not just on bringing the food. Many companies that are bringing these novel foods to market don't then want them tested on animals. So how can we actually come up with new approaches? So we're doing a lot of work on gut models at Fresh. And these are some of the new areas that we're scoping that would be really interested to work with people, particularly JCU. We're interested in looking at how we can work on allergenicity prediction using some of these models. And also we're working closely with BII, Sebastian's Institute, and JCU to look at aspects of allergy and toxicity prediction of proteins. Other areas that we're looking at are a little bit more standard, where we're applying in silico techniques to understand the chemistry of metabolites and products. So when many of these complex foods that are coming to market, they're not individual ingredients anymore. They're complex proteins, they're complex mixes. So how can we actually break down and understand all of these chemicals in there? Because when it comes to food safety, it's all about the components and how much. And we're also spending a lot of time on consumer education and risk perception. This is key because no matter how much we do, if there's not an understanding and acceptance of the safety, if there's not an understanding and acceptance of the proteins, then we're not going to see a translation for food security and we're not going to get acceptance of the safety approach. So one big area where we're actually working on at the moment is how can we nudge children as the deciders of what families eat to actually input more and take on more alternative proteins. Okay, so I'm going to end off and say that I love organizations and I love sessions like this where we can actually say, come and collaborate, come and work together, because food safety requires collaboration. Food safety is about everybody. Everybody here has to take a part in it. All of you who are developing new types of foods, novel foods, or developing new processes for aquaculture, you need to start thinking about food safety and bringing it into the equation. Safety by design, working from the beginning so that we can actually get these products to our plate. Collaboration, I'm just going to push on to it, is key, right? 1 + 1 = 3. I went into toxicology because I didn't like maths, but it's true, right? If we work together, we're going to be better. So key takeaways, safety science has to keep pace with novel food innovations. There's an opportunity here in Singapore, but in the tropics where a lot of this discussion and new food sources are happening, to really build up safety science capabilities and meet the needs of the novel food industry and agricultural industry. But we have to do this by collaborating. So on that note, thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Dean.
Thank you, Ben. And yes, it's very obvious. It's not just about volume. It's got to be safe as well. We're going to feed the people into 2050. Our next presenter, it's my pleasure to invite Professor Andreas Lopata to the podium. Andreas is a professor in James Cook University and a leading world expert in allergies, particularly around seafood and new novel foods as well. And Andreas is going to talk about the importance of understanding allergies in food safety.
Yeah, thanks very much for all the different speeches we heard already about food, food safety and seafood. That's what I'll talk a little bit today about. And thanks very much for Ben introducing the whole concept at food safety as part of food security. So, let me say, go forward. So, today I talk really very briefly about what is food allergy, what is allergy in general, and then really the different aspects why seafood allergy is very important. Josie talked already about the need of seafood in particular. I did my PhD on seafood allergy many years ago, and that was very exotic. Now it's really very relevant. So I'll hold it closer, okay. I think it's very relevant now, much more than it was years ago, particular of the increased need, as you said, about 4 or 5 times more consumption than it was like 30, 40 years ago. So what is the tropics? We heard all about the tropics and of Singapore, 30 food production, how important it is. But you see all these red areas there. This is all where we talk about the tropics. And what we know now, over 50% of the world population living there. Food consumption is very important. But what comes with food consumption, that's the area we are working in, is also food allergies, unfortunately. And food allergies, the same as the consumption is increasing worldwide, also the number and prevalence of allergies to different types of food. We know now by the next 3, 4, 5 years, about 50% of the world population has some type of allergy. This includes food allergy, but also inhalant allergy, house mite allergy, I show you just now, very important also in Singapore. So we have probably about 500 million people living worldwide with some type of food allergy. And if you're talking about making more novel and different types of food, we have to take this really in consideration. It's 10% of adults and 10% of any children have already some type of food allergy confirmed. So we know this, and we know out of this, 25% of these people with a food allergy reacting to seafood. So there comes again back the production of seafood. We have to be conscious about this and know what we're doing. So coming back to the whole allergen sources, food we talked about, inhalant, we know there are different ones, very important in different areas of the world. But in the middle, I put a few of them up which are very important in Asia. These are allergens which are not considered in Europe or North America, and you can't test for them. There are no diagnostic tests available because they're very unique to the region, like tropical mites, for example, bird's nest, beans, very different types of beans, pollen, and so on. So all of these things we have to take in consideration, particularly now where we're making more and different types of novel foods. So a couple of challenges, I don't want to go too much in detail, but most of this I talked to you already about. But most importantly, the allergen sources are very diverse in tropical regions and absolutely under-investigated. We are really scratching there on the surface when it comes to research, investigating really this on a molecular level. Again, not making it too complicated for you, but you have to basically understand why or what cross-reactivity is. If somebody is allergic to a particular food or house mite, as I show you there, subsequently when they get exposed to these allergen sources, they get allergic symptoms. Now, it could be asthma, it could be anaphylaxis, and it could be caused by inhalant mites, which are very topical here in Singapore, or it could be the ingested food. So these proteins which are there, which we talked just now about it, these proteins causing so-called cross-reactivity on an immunological level, on a cellular level. And this again we have to take in consideration when we're making some type of different foods. And coming back to our seafoods, we have here particular these, on the right side you see the so-called shellfish group, which contains crustaceans and mollusks, and then on the other side we have the fish. But as an example, we'll talk today particular about crustaceans, and there are other cross-reactive allergen sources, which are the mites and also insects. And we talked about insects just now in the context of actually not something which is an ick factor, but really as a new allergen source through ingestion of insects, not just inhaling what is traditionally thought in Europe and North America when it comes to diagnostics and treatments. So there are possibility of so-called clinical cross-reactivity of these proteins. Prevalence of mite in Singapore very much, as you can see here on this data. In red, Singapore is unfortunately quite small on this scale, but is one of over 80% of the population here in Singapore sensitized to the so-called tropical mite, which is again very different from the mites you find in Europe and North America. Not very much investigated, some studies are there done, but some of these proteins are almost identical as proteins you find in seafood, in particular in shellfish. So there's something very important, and we see also here in Singapore the number one food allergy with people landing up in hospital with anaphylaxis is shellfish. So these are the facts we know already. So when it comes to alternative protein sources, plant proteins we heard about, algae, seaweed. Ben had a whole battery of really nice little slides on this, but I make it very simple. The one is the insect proteins and the other ones are cultured meats, which I talk a little bit about it. The insect proteins, definitely we have a lot of data from 2 or 3 insects. Now in Singapore this year, I think up to 16 different insect species are registered for consumption. So only 2 or 3 are actually very well studied. The other ones we don't really know much about it. Cultured meat, I will not show you today data on actually measurement of cultured meat because we are in a very early stage. They are not really on the market yet. There's a lot of development happening, but I will tell you the differences makes the environment and other factors the amount of allergens you can find in an animal source. So there are really considerations to take into account. Edible insects were advertised really as a very big food source for the future. As we said, 16 species already here in Singapore being allowed. You find lots of different food products you can buy online. Even Australia, we have a few farms where they breed mealworms, crickets, but also black soldier flies. So there's a whole battery of different insects, and only some of them actually what these allergens do. But when we look up what, oh, that was of course the wrong one. Here we are. When we look at allergens in insects and cross-reactivity, we have here 2 immunoblots from protein extracts. On the left side, this ugly thing that is so-called black soldier fly larvae. So they are not really used for consumption. And the only reason for this is because they don't taste very nice. But otherwise, the protein content's fantastic. On the right side, we've got crickets, and they're very well organized, and they're very well sold already, different food products. And here you have antibody binding of patients with prawn allergy. So these guys have never really eaten insects. They're Australians. They're definitely by purpose never eaten insect. It has to be a steak or something or prawn. So, and you can see it clearly there's antibody binding. So it's definitely there would have most likely allergic or not even anaphylactic reactions if they would eat these proteins based from black soldier fly or cricket. Now black soldier fly, very importantly in aquaculture, is increasingly used also as a feed. So what Ben earlier said about viruses or bacteria pathologically infecting humans through the insects could also happen here with the allergens of food used in aquaculture. There's something to consider, and we're actually working on this to see if these allergens from the insects can land up in food products, in seafood products through the feed. The next question we ask about, does it matter where these shellfish come from? What origin? Do they come from different countries? Do they come from aquaculture? Do they come from wild farm? Does it make a difference in the allergen contents? Again, think about cultured meat. Cultured seafood is very much in common. We're working with 2 companies here in Singapore already, the one making cultured shrimps, prawns, and the other one making cultured seafood, cultured fish. So there we're looking at the differences if you have these cultured meat, because you're using stem cells from these individual products and then grow them large. Does it make a difference if you get these tissues or these cells from different countries or different body parts even? So when we looked here at the tiger prawn from different countries, you see the names on it, and we looked at the wild caught and aquaculture caught, and the question was, do they have different allergens? And the answer is very simple, yes. Here on the top, the columns you see the different locations, some of them Queensland farmed on the very left side. On the right side, I have to look, I can't read this. It's farmed from India. And you can see on the left side the different types of allergens. And the size of the bubble gives you the intensity and amount of allergens you find in these different products. And you can see for some of them on the bottom, the cycloplasmic calcium-binding protein is one of the known allergens, almost identical in all species. But then it comes to other ones like tropomycin or other hemocyanin allergens. There are huge differences depending from where these animals come. Why are the differences? We don't know yet, but most likely there are environmental impact. If they are grown in aquaculture, for example, we know that most aquaculture prawn species have more tropomycin. And tropomycin is unfortunately a major allergen, but of course it's also a major muscle protein. You want to have big prawns with a lot of muscle tissue, so this goes hand in hand in a way. So things to consider when you make cell-based tissue from these guys. So what about different species? Here, these are 5 different prawn species, and one of our students analyzed it and spent a lot of time comparing the allergen contents. And what you see here, the different bar graphs and the different color, each color represents a different species. And you clearly can see the colors of bars are very different. The very left, the blue bar, is our tiger prawn, and you can see some of the allergens are double or triple as high as in other species. So something also people have not really considered, looking at growing now cell-based shrimp, looking at there's already a difference in the different species. If we go one further, what about other species? So in the meanwhile I can tell you more. What you can see also, there are differences. On the left side, some of these allergens, they are very, very common, and one of them are very rare. So these about 12 proteins are now registered. And we're using also a la carte pro. I will show you just now much more that we're also using some in silico approaches, not just measurement in wet science, which is traditionally done, thank you, but also using in silico analysis. And when we look at different crustacean species, we see here, this is a red claw lobster. What about rearing or breeding them at different temperatures? Think about climate change. Climate change is exactly what happens uncontrolled in an environment. In a farm, you can control this. And this we did exactly in these experiments. We're keeping red claw lobsters at 3 different temperatures, 17, 28 degree and 32, and looking at the allergens. Do they vary? Proteins most likely vary because these animals have to adapt to different conditions. But we see here in the major differences already, here in pink or in a dark blue, when you look at the claw, tail and head, even 3 different body parts, there are definitely differences in the concentration of allergens. And it's not easy to say temperature goes up and all the allergens go up. It's very diverse. It's much more complex. And when you look at body parts, most of us eat, of course, the tail, but also the claws are eaten, or even the head parts are eaten. The allergen content is very different. You see here on the left side, the tail, there are very different allergens at different temperatures going up and down, as on the right side in claw tissue. Again, this is something to consider if you grow now cell-based prawns in a petri dish. What is the starting material before we starting actually making these products? And this is, of course, very complex. This is, we here see this approach A, B, C, D, which traditionally you have these extracts. You look at mass spectrometry, you use really high technologies. But we're using also now a more bioinformatics approach, using a la carte pro, which was developed here at A-Star with Sebastian. And this is really, really helpful to go to the next level, to do really high throughput screening of tissues and analyzing it, and not just individually, and see what the allergen contents does over the development stages, and how can we really predict it and manipulate it in a kind of laboratory-based setting. But having said all of this, at the end, we are looking at the product which is a starting product. On the very left side here in this diagram, the raw material, I will say, when we grow them in tissue culture or grow them in a farm. And on the very right side on the diagram is actually what we're eating, the processed food. So food processing also has a lot of impact on so-called allergenicity of food. So this also comes into the food safety, not from bacteria or toxins, but from the allergen point of view, because some of these proteins are very sensitive or not very stable against heating or high pressure processing, and other proteins are very sensitive. So processing of these foods is also something more and more investigated in a way to manipulate the allergen contents of these foods. And these are traditional foods, but also the novel foods. Also think about it, having foods now produced from algae, produced from fungi or from cell-based tissue. What happens if we heat them? What happens if we process them all the way down? Do we actually reduce allergenicity to a very large extent? That brings me to the conclusion. So we have really allergen contents differs in animal tissue. I always have to emphasize it. It's very different from tissues from plants. So here we're talking about animal tissue, varies really with the impact of the environment, biological function of course, the cross-reactivity of these proteins to particular other allergen sources like mites and insects is something to consider and should be used for all novel alternative protein production. So in a nutshell, food safety is really involves a lot of multidisciplinary approaches, and that's also what Ben mentioned. It's all about collaboration, working together, brainstorming, using different technologies, using in silico technologies and advancing it further. And here a couple of collaborators over the last year and a half here in Singapore and JCU Australia, trying to achieve what Ben mentioned, is really producing healthy and safety food for Singapore in the next few years. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andreas. And you've always got to break something. Moving along, our next presenter, it's my pleasure to invite Aaron Naidu from the Good Food Institute. The Good Food Institute is an institute that promotes sustainable food production with a focus increasingly on alternative proteins and cell-based products. And Aaron's going to tell you all about the Good Food Institute and what they're doing in this space around food security on our planet.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's great to hear from all the speakers today. If you all aren't already hungry, I feel like my presentation will definitely make you hungry by the end, because it's going to be lots of photos of food. But yes, so today I'm here representing GFI, the Good Food Institute, APAC specifically, and I'll be talking to you about how alternative proteins are a climate solution that scales. And I'll start by giving a brief introduction into what GFI is and what we do, and then go into a little bit more detail about the different types of alternative protein products, and then talk about what are some of the needs in this industry right now. So yeah, GFI is an international network of nonprofit think tanks, fully funded by philanthropy, which is developing the roadmap for a sustainable, secure, and just protein supply. We're now 150 and definitely growing organization, which are spread across the whole globe. So we have GFI US, GFI Brazil, GFI Europe, Israel, India, APAC, and hopefully we'll be adding some more in the future as well. But we work primarily across three programmatic pillars, which is policy, corporate engagement, and science and technology. On the policy side, we work on shaping international and national regulations on alt proteins, not just here in Singapore, but hoping to spread this work to the rest of the APAC region as well as equipping industry players with regulatory knowledge, elevating alt protein as a food security and climate solution, and securing funding for R&D for alt proteins. So within Singapore, we find ourselves working with organizations like A-Star, Fresh, and SFA, and yeah. And then in terms of corporate engagement, we engage and advise startups, investors, and MNCs. So we provide technical knowledge as well as give them a landscape of what's happening in the region. We also work on community building, host events, bring people together, network, really facilitate those connections which promote innovation and progress. As well as also really deep dive into specific issues which are for Singapore and Southeast Asia and APAC overall. So things like crop diversification to localized supply chains, and also scaling up. And then lastly, on the science and technology team, which is where I sit as a SciTech engagement specialist, we work on identifying technological white space opportunities, building open access information, developing talent, having research grant programs, and also building curriculum and coursework for universities. Yeah, I specifically work on university engagement and talent development. And yeah, so to all of the students out there too, if you have any questions about all proteins, feel free to contact me. But yeah, I mean, you guys are, I'm sure have already seen this many times, but there's a surging demand for animal protein in Asia. From 2017 to 2050, we're going to see a 78% increase in meat and seafood consumption. And this sheer scale of demand increase, the current industrial animal agriculture system is not going to be sufficient. So we need to come up with new methods to really support this, as well as optimize what's going on. But some issues with industrialized animal agriculture right now, sustainability, efficiency, safety, and security, right? So 20% of greenhouse gas emissions are driven by industrial animal agriculture. It's one of the leading causes of greenhouse gases globally. It's innately inefficient. I will talk a little bit more about this in the next slide, but also there's projections of 10 million annual deaths from antimicrobial resistance by 2050. So we need to come up with a system which is more efficient, more sustainable, and more safe and secure. So talking about the energy loss, so cycling calories through animals is a fundamentally inefficient way to produce protein. So it takes 9 calories in to grow, for every 9 calories in used to grow chicken, you only get 1 calorie out when you're eating chicken breast or chicken thigh. And this kind of progresses in terms of pork and beef products as well. So like we said, we need to optimize what's happening in industrial animal agriculture, as well as come up with systems which are more energy efficient than this. So this leads to the next crux of my talk, which is what are alternative proteins. And this has already been touched upon previously in this talk when addressing future foods, but I'll go into a little bit more detail about it and why it's important. So alternative proteins, as we said, is a scalable climate solution and really fits into these 3 different categories as we have right now. So there's plant-based, cultivated, and fermentation. And it's fermentation derived. And it's really a way which food producers can create meat, eggs, and dairy products more efficiently by making them from plants, cultivating proteins directly from an animal cell, or producing them through fermentation. And yeah, plant-based proteins. So I'm sure you see a lot of like oat milks, you see a lot of plant-based chickens, but it's really mixing together different ingredients like proteins, fat, vitamins, minerals, getting them into the right material format, and then producing them for consumption. And the process of this happening is really 3 steps. So the one is just getting the raw materials first. So looking at the crop you want to use. It could be soybean, pea protein, more local to Southeast Asia, maybe something like mung bean. The different starches you need, like rice, from rice. So figuring out what crops you want to use, and then maybe optimizing them through breeding techniques or engineering so that you are really maximizing the potentials of these crops, right? And then once that is done, you get to the ingredient processing, isolation, and functionalization part. So through different techniques, purification, fractionation, you're going to actually draw out the required material from that crop. So if you're getting it from soybeans, it's extracting out that soy protein which is going to be used. And then at the end, you kind of make this big slush, combine it all with water into a slurry of sorts, and then put it through something like an extruder or a 3D printer to create those muscle fibers which you're seeing in meat products. So the idea behind all of this, it's rooted in biomimicry. So looking at how chicken, beef, the structure and the function of these muscle fibers and recreating it with plant proteins. And yeah, just within Southeast Asia alone, we're seeing a lot of different products out there, from Growthwell, Tyndall here in Singapore, Green Monday, and then also from bigger corporations like Meat Zero from CP and OMG Meat from Thai Union. Yeah, I've tried a lot of these products myself, actually. So yeah, and yeah, on the environmental impact, this is probably one of the more straightforward ones, as we'll see a little bit later. But the environmental impacts of plant-based meats are quite clear in terms of land use, water use, air pollution, toxic chemicals, and greenhouse gases. It is quite a high percentage higher than the others. As you'll see, there's still a lot of bottlenecks within the system, which I will address later in the presentation. But going to cultivated meat now, where it's recreating what's happening within the animal cell or tissue, but doing that in a petri dish, or extracting that cell and growing it outside, right? So it facilitates the same biological process that happens inside an animal by providing the cells with the right nutrients, warmth, and conditions to grow. And the way this looks like is just super brief. It's quite a complicated system in itself, but extracting out a required cell from an animal source, putting it into the right media, right conditions with nutrients, and then really promoting two phases. One is cell proliferation, and then the other is cell differentiation or tissue maturation. So it's really allowing the cells to divide and grow, and then having them actually get directed and differentiated into the desired cell or tissue type, which is going to be fat, muscles, or connective tissue, fibroblasts. Yeah. And this is, we're seeing a lot more startups, a lot more companies working in this field globally. And just within Singapore itself, we have the first commercial sales from Good Meat with their chicken product. And we also have Shiok Meats and Umami Meats, which is local to Singapore producing. And then when it comes to the LCA component, this is a little bit more complicated than on the plant-based meat side. And these LCAs are also continuously getting updated. These are our most recent findings, is that you'll see on certain portions that it's better. Other components, it's not really there yet. And it really comes down to the fact that this is still a nascent technology, and there's still a lot of process optimizations which is required. For example, blue water use. Blue water is water found in surface and groundwater reservoirs. Does not include rainfall, but it's still used quite a lot in the media component of cultivated meat. So this is a really good way to also identify technologies within the systems which needs to be optimized, as well as energy demand. You can see that it still requires a lot more energy than conventional meat, so this is coming up with ways to utilize more renewable sources of energy. And lastly, this is fermentation, and it's really an enabling technology using microbes to produce the right ingredients which goes into alternative protein products. And it's split into 3 areas: traditional fermentation, biomass fermentation, precision fermentation. And really simply put, traditional fermentation is a process of changing a food through microbial anaerobic digestion. So beer, wine, yogurt, cheese, it's all what we would consider traditional fermentation. Biomass fermentation is using microbes which are growing really fast and have high protein. So things like filamentous fungi, and actually using that whole product, not really extracting anything from it, as the protein source itself. And then lastly, precision fermentation, which involves a lot more precision, as it says in the name, but we're actually genetically engineering the microbes itself to produce the desired ingredient or protein, and then goes through a more complicated purification and extraction process to get that required ingredient out. But really, nothing needs to be siloed in one thing. They can all work together. So we really see it as a spectrum. So from something which is fully plant-based to something which is fully cultivated, we can use aspects of cultivated meat to really bring that taste, texture, nutrition into maybe a plant-based product at small ingredients right now, maybe to improve the quality but not really increase the price of the product as of yet. And we can really utilize plant-based formulations as a way to kind of transition into a fully cultivated product as that system gets scaled up. So we really are thinking about how can we combine all of these systems together. And then on the cost side, these are studies done by BCG as well as CE Delft, just giving ballpark points of where we can see price parity for each of these different pillars of alternative proteins. Of course, we'll have to see as the technology and scaling up progresses. And then, areas of greatest need, really it comes down to taste, health, and price. If we want to build a demand for these products, which will innately then kind of push for more supply. You got to create products that taste the same, if not better, than conventional products. And then on the health side, it needs to impart health and nutritional benefits that appeal to consumers, and on price at a price which consumers are willing to pay. In Southeast Asia, we need to understand the purchasing power. We need to cater the flavors to what is important here in Asia. We can't really expect sausages and burgers to sell out entire restaurants, right? So we want to look into each market, see what is going to be consumed here, and then recreate that. And then even in health, nutritionally, the different requirements will be needed for the region, and meeting the consumers where they're at. So understanding what type of consumer education, what type of information they need. And the key players who could work on that are policy, industry, and academia, right? And I won't go into too much detail here, but on the policy side, we're seeing governments around the world are integrating alternative proteins into strategies, regulations, and guidelines. You can look more into this in the slides, but at GFI, we're also promoting this. There's been a huge push in Singapore alone, and we want to also expand that out to the rest of APAC. And then on university side, really fostering that research and innovation, empowering the professors, getting funding in, and building the curriculum. So it's not supposed to be targeted at just like biological science. The entire alternative protein industry can really pull in talents from all sorts of fields. So getting business people in, getting consumer psychology students into this, and really integrating this understanding into multiple parts of the university system. And yeah, lastly, building community. Investments are needed as well. We're seeing investments grow. This is just showing from 2015 to 2022 how much growth there has been in the APAC region, mostly to Singapore and China, but there is still much more room to grow here, as I'll show you later. And just another really cool slide too, just in terms of distribution, between the yellow bar is showing the amount of investments, percentage of investments globally, which goes to North America, and then the other colors are showing other regions, and you can see that APAC, Australasia, Europe is growing. So things are trending in a positive way, but there is still room for, a lot of room for growth. Just comparing it to electric vehicles, as well as solar, renewable energy, alternative proteins is still quite underfunded. These numbers here are a little bit older, but it's still showing the same trends. And something I work on specifically here at GFI as well, and as I said, for all the students or anybody interested in a career in alternative proteins, please feel free to reach out. But we're also trying to build out, this is a little bit complicated, but trying to really build out the different job roles which are required in alternative proteins. So this is just an example of what are the different job roles in the plant-based meat industry. So you can see from ingredient selection to formulation, texturization, to food application development, manufacturing, safety, quality, regulatory. There's a lot of different job roles, and they all are really well integrated. And at GFI, we're trying to kind of understand this more so that we can clarify this path for university students as well. And yeah, this is just an example of, like, if you were to go on LinkedIn, you'll see a lot of different job titles out there for these roles. And I won't go into too much detail here, but as already mentioned, there's a lot of questions which are specific to alternative proteins. Just on the business development side, for example, how to engage meat-eating audience to get a larger market share. But we're building out job descriptions to really clarify this for people who are interested in coming into the alternative protein field as well. I'd like to end my talk there, but as I said, for anybody who's interested in learning more, please check out our website. We have a lot of educational resources about alternative proteins. We have a lot of white papers, and feel free to reach out to me directly too if you have any further questions. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron. Okay, the audience has sat patiently and probably hungry from everybody talking about food, but really scared to eat it. in case it's full of allergens and other bad stuff. I invite all the panellists up, please, to the table, because it's now the audience opportunity to ask some questions around any of the topics that were talked about in this forum. So I might just start off while I read these with a simple question for all the panellists is, what do you think the future of food will be in 2050 in terms of the mix of foods that we're seeing now? Are we going to see traditional food systems remain relatively static? Are we going to see this rapid acceleration in these alternative cell-based products? And for the lab geeks and their food safety is, how do we actually make sure this is safe? So what are the key things we need to look at? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll start us off by saying I don't see traditional food going anywhere. I think that will still be a big part of the way we consume food. But I do anticipate alternative protein products being more prevalent in what's being consumed as well, not just standalone or hybrid, but also potentially even blended in with animal agriculture products as well, to increase maybe the amount of protein or to bring down prices as we try to feed the global population.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with that. And I think one of the big discussions that we're having a lot about, we hear everyone talk about replacement. And I don't think it's about replacement, it's about alternatives and even new product categories. And so we're having a lot of discussion at the regulatory level about even opening up new food categories in some of this novel food space. And so I think it's really interesting to see where some of this will go. I fully agree that traditional won't go away. What I think we might see a little bit more of in the future, maybe a little bit past 2050, but starting maybe around there, is seeing more local approaches like what Singapore is doing. So approaches that actually fit the region. And this is something that actually is being discussed at WHO and also UNICEF level, of having the right protein sources for a particular country that can actually be produced in that region. So around areas where there's sea, you can have aquaculture, but you can also have fermentation with things like spirulina in salt water and other things. So I think we'll probably start to see some of that as well. So yeah, I'm excited to see actually where things are going to go.
You Ben?
Yeah, yeah. Just following on this, I mean, what you said, I think that exactly this is really what will happen is the combination of different types of protein sources. If it's now insect, cell-based meat, plants, all together in a way that is for the particular country or region very palatable and affordable. But with this comes, of course, the kind of, on the policy side, the analysis. Now, when it comes to the food product, having new categories definitely will help, but also somebody has to make sure that these categories are adhered to. So there will be a much more testing required on DNA level, protein level, food safety, just authenticity by itself. And so it's super complex, and because Singapore is really in the cutting edge in this area of alternative proteins, I think there's really an opportunity for really also developing really on-site and parallel technologies where we make sure what is really in the food is what is really on the label.
Your question was up to 2050, right? So I will go with 3D printing of food because it's far in the future. But I think on the way, you know, I fully agree, of course, with my colleagues. There should be a lot more of the traditional food. And I think there is also one opportunity that through industrialization, what we have done is we have very much reduced the species that we use to produce most of the carbohydrates. And with all this research going on, we can go back to explore exploring more of the natural diversity. And I'll stay with the science fiction side of things too, that, just now that we grow maybe basil on the balcony or so, maybe we can do even more. We can do our own shrimp cell culture, in a just like you can buy a 3D printer now, and you will buy a robotic machine that can make the food for you at that moment. And so I'm, of course, optimistic for the future, but food safety and a transition, that's actually it's a good point. While we are worried about getting the taste right and a lot of other things, the nutritional content and the healthiness of that food still needs to improve too.
I think everybody well covered it all, and from my perspective as aquaculturist, I learn a lot. Even though I see this more alternative protein products kind of coming into my household, my wife buying this corn, which is this fermented stuff I learned today. I think that will be a how can I put, to have more alternative is not the full replacement. I'm still not too sure, like if we go for a barbecue, if we go for a alternative meat, or if we go for a steak, but I think with the marketing, and the food safety behind it, you can clarify that, and I think it'll be more available. But in terms of from what I spoke before, how we're going to produce enough food for the world, I think it still needs to be like a combined, the strategies of all fronts. And sometimes I feel that we need to develop more local solutions for each country, that they can be more independent from others. And we see a lot of the multinationals start to take over. But it would be interesting to see local initiatives to empower people locally to produce their own proteins.
Thank you. Well, as predicted by me, there's quite a few questions about cultivated meats. And it relates to the most popular question, is how can we ensure the safety of cultivated meats when there is no study yet on the long-term effects of consuming such products? Who wants to take this one?
First, I'll say that there's really no long-term study on many foods that we're actually consuming, but we do have, I suppose, history where we can actually look. It's a great question, and it's always one of the challenges when you bring a new additive or a new food onto the market, is really trying to understand what are the potential risks and how do we offset that with regard to also the benefits. And so the way that we're approaching many of the cultivated meats is we really are breaking it down into understanding what is the composition of these cultivated meats. And if we think about it, we actually know pretty much quite a lot about what goes into a cultivated meat, because we're taking cells that we know where they've come from a particular type of animal tissue. We know the type of protein, and so we can characterize that protein and understand whether there are higher levels of allergens or not. We can ensure that the cell line is actually similar phenotypically to what is being grown in a living animal. And we can also look at the media, and really it's the media components that are probably the biggest area where we're putting a lot of attention on when it comes to actually understanding the safety, because we are using materials that maybe we normally wouldn't be seeing in the addition of traditional foods or traditional processed foods. They are, many of them, of course, endogenous because they're growth factors and nutrients that we would have in the body, but we're adding them differently. But the advantage of knowing what's there is that we can look at these materials, we can generate data on them, and take what we term in the food safety area critical component approach. And so we look at those key ingredients and understand how much of them are going to be there in the final product, and can then set safety levels. But really, when it comes to a lot of the cultivated meats, we're looking at it also from this concept of substantial equivalence. So the main protein and biggest mass is the same as what you would primarily be seeing in an animal source. So that doesn't answer the whole long-term thing, but you could argue also long-term consumption of meat. We're starting to realize that that's not necessarily healthy on us. Long-term consumption of soy protein, you can argue there are also issues with regard to things like endocrine disruption because of the components there. So there's a lot to understand with food in general, how food changes our diet. It's a complex area. It's not just an individual food. All of these things are parts of the diet. We're talking about nutrition of proteins and different types of sources, and people are trying to make standards and say, well, let's take the best protein that has best bioavailability, best DIAS score, and everyone's jumping on these sorts of concepts. Yet, for those of you who are nutritionists in the or gastrointestinal biologists in the audience, you know that how you mix these foods, put two different proteins together and you can change the DIAS, you can change the uptake. So how we eat, what we're eating, as long as we're eating a balanced diet and we're ensuring that what goes into that diet is at safe levels, well then that's pretty much the best we can do at this moment, but we have to keep learning and have to keep asking the questions to make sure that things untoward are not getting introduced into the food.
Ben? This next one's probably for you, Jose. It says, for the marine, it's disappeared on me. For the marine coastal fish farms, would rising sea temperature increase the risk of parasites, diseases affecting the fish, therefore affecting the productivity? And are there any ways that we can prevent this so that we can ensure that aquaculture in the marine system is still productive and the industry can grow under a changing environment?
Okay, so with increasing sea temperatures, increasing temperature, there's overall increasing metabolism and reproductive rate of parasites. And if temperature is beyond the comfort zone level of the animal, it will reduce the immune system also, which will make it more susceptible. So I believe the key in aquaculture moving forward is to be able to fully control the environment, to maintain the animals at their ideal environmental levels for all parameters, and to move away from having, let's say, open sea cages where animals are totally exposed to any chemical pollutants in the environment, exposed to different pathogens, and having more like a full control system. So I think this is moving forward how it should operate, because we can be more predictable, just for the simple fact that an algal bloom can kill an entire production, as it has happened in Singapore every 5 years or so. All farmers lose all their fish because some toxin from some algal species comes in and depletes oxygen levels. So I think to ensure food safety, food security, and have enough, we need to control, because we can better predict the output.
Thank you. I'll ask whoever answers this question to keep it fairly short so we can get through the questions. How can consumers ensure that cultivated meat is not genetically modified? Is there legislation to prevent this in place?
You know about the legacy?
I mean, could you repeat that one more time? Sorry.
Yeah. How can consumers ensure that cultivated meat is not genetically modified? Is there legislation to prevent this in place?
I mean, I do not know the exact legislation here in Singapore, but from my experience pushing a product, getting GRAS approval in the US, I know that if it was a genetically modified organism, then I think the legislation and regulation which the product would have to go through for that is vastly different. So, yeah.
Yeah. Actually, GRAS, everything goes through the same process. So there is no genetically modified legislation in the US. Here in Singapore, we have a process called the GMAC, which is a review of genetically modified approaches. I think what we really have to do here is educate what is genetic modification and the benefits that it can actually be. In the industry, there's no one that's doing genetic modification at the moment of cell lines, but they are looking at it as a process, and there are clear processes for that within the Novel Food Framework in Singapore. In Europe, it's a separate legislation, and in US, it's all under GRAS. There is no such thing as a genetic modified organism in the US.
Maybe just one quick addition also from the scientific side. When you grow cells, what genetic changes happen, they would also result in changes in the relative abundance of some of the expressed genes as well as the proteins that are being produced. So as a matter of fact, in the production process, to ensure there is consistency, there is monitoring that these levels remain the same, so that you can rely on that there hasn't been a genetic change.
Okay. Naturally versus synthetically produced food. What are the international food agencies that provide standards to protect consumers in the context of side effects?
What's all coming to me? As the token person that is associated with regulation. Yeah, no, I think that this whole concept again of natural versus synthetic is it's a really interesting question. When it comes down to it, they're all chemicals. And they all have a certain receptor activity that leads to its action, whether it's a taste or whether it's a toxicity. And it's understanding those chemicals, where they're from and their source. Obviously, their source can then introduce different types of process contaminants and things that we have to be aware of. But this whole concept of additives that are natural versus synthetic is a little bit of a misnomer. In fact, many of our exposures to toxins are natural sourced materials. From a legislation perspective, there are key approaches. There's key levels that are set for any ingredient that's brought in. So any new additive has to be assessed, and it has to be used under certain conditions of use. And that's how we can control the safety, whether it's a natural or a synthetically produced additive.
Thank you, Ben. This is an interesting question. Would Singapore be doing all of these food technological research if they had geographical and natural resources, just like other countries?
I was talking so optimistically about Singapore. I think it's very natural that when you're scarce in resources, that you have to think of how do you get things done. And but at the same time, the whole history of Singapore has been how do you deal with this situation in all scenarios. So I think it's more of a hypothetical question, because Singapore has always been in this area. But if you look at also where investments are going, it's not just related to resource scarcity. Another one would be water, for example. There's also a program for there. But it's also, there have been investment in biotechnology for drug development. So there are Singapore started drug development programs that are making it into patients. patients. So that's a clear example that Singapore is an innovative place and is not just a necessity that we're looking at the food. But it also shows there is a conscious, because this kind of research is important for the rest of the world too. Because we need to look at how can you feed a lot more people, how can you improve food production, how can you reach everyone with a healthy nutritional diet. And someone also has to start. So I think it's a great responsibility that Singapore has also taken on to contribute here.
So allergies are increasing in people in the tropics, and these new alternative foods are coming into production. What can we do about it in terms if people are getting more allergenic?
Yes, it's a good question, and of course the consumer, before they go and buy these new products, this is questions that come through their mind or through media and are discussed. And of course one thing is monitoring right from the beginning, as we showed you some example earlier on. Monitoring on the analytical level, on policies using in vitro and in silico methods. It's really now cutting edge technologies we have in place. The second thing is, of course, long term. I mean, as Ben earlier said, there are most of the foods we're eating, there are no real long-term studies. Only when people get sick, people start looking backwards on the food source. So, but monitoring now, we can really looking in advance what we are knowing from other foods and from other clinical studies, if there's some allergies popping up. So I think we're much better equipped than we were 20 years ago, that we're not completely blind and have to wait until somebody gets sick. We can really do this preventative and monitoring during the development. And we're right now at the cutting edge, I will say, stage, particularly when we talk about cell-based meat. Singapore was the first country in the whole world actually bringing this already 2 years on the market. And now many other countries are following us, like America. Only this year the FDA approved also cell-based chicken. In 5 years' time we will have many of these products on the market, cell-based meat, and by then we will have many more studies being on the way, analyzing these products for allergens. So we have the tools, we can do it. We just have to invest enough, the different countries, not just Singapore, in making sure that we monitoring and know what we are putting on the plate for consumers.
Besides food security, a large part of food security is also on food accessibility and the cost, which, I mean, you touched briefly on this. How long will it take to reach affordability for novel foods?
Yeah, I mean, we had a slide up there showing different but I think it was by BCG, showing that maybe around 2023 to 2024, we could get price parity on certain plant-based products, and then closer, I believe it was maybe 2032, 2033 for cultivated meat. But I think it is really, at least on the plant-based side, we're not really there as of now. If you look like products like Impossible Meat, I believe there was one example I just saw recently where it was being charged at, I think, like $22 as compared to the traditional meat product was maybe around 7 or 8. So I think it really depends too, and I think being able to do things more locally, being able to use more local ingredients will help bring those prices down. Was recently in Thailand talking with some of the companies there, and a big part of their strategy is actually trying to figure out how they can use protein sources which are harvested in Thailand itself to bring those prices down, because a lot of the reasons they've had to pull their products out of shelf in the last couple of years is because it was just too high, and for the mass consumption, if the price is too high, nobody's going to buy it. So I believe it's really just dependent on ingredient sourcing, at least on plant-based meat, and then on the fermentation cultivated meat side, probably a lot more time due to processing technologies. Yeah.
Okay, because we're all getting hungry. I'm going to wind this up in a minute after one last question. Quite a controversial one. So be careful. Yeah. What are the odds of Singapore reaching its 30 by 30 goals? And the Prime Minister is listening. Sebastian.
I think when you set goals, they have to be aspirational. And I'm not going to quote John F. Kennedy because that would be too inspirational for this. I think it's not unrealistic. I think, of course, it depends on many factors. And if there would be a deviation from exactly these numbers, it's because there would be other changes. Because when you talk about 30% of food supply, there are many factors that go around. And as you can see, there are many different areas that are being worked on. Also, there are things like vertical farming that we didn't cover and so on. Then it's not just about also the alternative proteins alone. This is a big development of high technology. So the proportion of exactly this for the affordable price, that still depends on some technological breakthroughs in order to make them affordable. But the whole spectrum of options that Singapore is investing in or is trying out have a good chance for it to become true. And of course, I'm optimistic working here for a long time. But as I mentioned in the very beginning, we have seen big things coming up here already.
Okay, thank you. So thank you everyone for your questions. We won't be able to get to all of them. But I would like you all now to thank our speakers, please, for their engaging presentations. I hope we've all learnt a bit. I hope we're optimistic for the future about food security in the tropics. And so please join with me with thanking all our presenters.